Welcome to this first episode of Diving Deeper from Longfleet Baptist Church. My name's Ken, I'm the minister here at Longfleet Baptist Church, and I'm joined by my good friend Andrew, who's a member here at the church. Every week here at Longfleet we do a Bible study where we dive a bit more deeply into the themes of the Sunday sermon, and what we thought we'd do in this little podcast is discuss two or three of the questions from the Bible study. I invite you to get involved. Comment in the comment section. Are we right? Are we wrong? Are we completely heretical? Let us know what you think. Even better, come along on Mondays or Wednesdays, or come along on Sundays and listen to the sermon. The times for all those things are put in the comments box. And I'll put a link to the recording of the sermon there as well, so you can listen to the sermon and see what's said. So today we're thinking about the healing of the Centurion's servant, which happens in Matthew 8, verses 5 to 13, and Luke 7, 1 to 10. This story takes place in Capernaum at the northern end of Lake Galilee, in an area that was governed by Herod Antipas. So the Centurion is not in the Roman army, but he's in Herod Antipas's army. Both Luke and Matthew portray the event as occurring shortly after Jesus began his public ministry, seemingly just a few days after his temptation in the wilderness and before all 12 of his disciples had been called. The Jewish elders in the story are likely to be local synagogue leaders rather than the Pharisees and teachers of the religious law that we see later in the Gospels. So our first question is about the Centurion's statement in Matthew 8, verse 8, where he says to Jesus, "I am not worthy to have you come under my roof." In some versions it says, "I do not deserve to have you come under my roof." So, Andrew, what do we think? What does the Centurion mean by this statement? "I am not worthy to have you come under my roof"?
So he probably doesn't. He feels like things that have happened in his life, and who he knows who Jesus is and what he has done, he feels maybe dirty.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Like he feels tainted, maybe that Jesus shouldn't love him because of maybe his past. Because sometimes when we do things not according to God, possibly, we feel shame. So maybe in this moment he feels shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, he's an experienced soldier. If he's a centurion, equivalent to an officer in the modern army, maybe he's done stuff that he's ashamed of. He's fought wars.
Yeah.
He's part of Herod Antipas's quite oppressive army. Maybe there is that sense of shame there, and personal shame from other things he's done as well.
Yeah.
This sense of worthiness in the Bible can mean worthy according to the Jewish law, and he's probably not Jewish, although he's local man. He's in the Herod Antipas's army. He's probably not Jewish, and therefore he knows he can't maintain the standards of the Jewish Old Testament law. He can't live up to that, and if he thinks that Jesus is maybe he already realises that Jesus is the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, and he realises he can't possibly be worthy enough to have the attention of the Jewish Messiah. But as a centurion, he's going to have command over quite a lot of men.
Yeah.
And you don't often find that level of humility
in a commander.
You've got to balance it, haven't you? I was in the army, and you've got to have this balance of humility and authority. If you're too humble, people won't do what you say. If you're too authoritarian,
then
they won't respect you. And he seems to have this balance, doesn't he?
I think it's a real relatable kind of thing shown by the Centurion for us as humans as well, and us who are trying to follow Christ. And I can say, for example, on my my walk with Christ, there's been times where I feel like I have done something or I have backslid, you know, and I feel like you hear, whether in your head or through other people, that, you know, God's not going to love you through all of this. And I feel like this kind of not worthiness kind of stems from maybe not knowing God's love and how far it stretches for you, and the things in this world can make you just feel ashamed and not want to seek, because you've maybe dug yourself a hole, and then you kind of keep digging and kind of then put God aside, because you already, with my mind, I'm like, oh, God's not going to love me now because I've been doing all of these things. So I might as well continue doing all these things because I feel like I'm already separated from God's love. But I feel like Jesus in this has kind of seen that, wow, his humility, the centurion's humility, and the centurion knows that Jesus can heal him, but in his mind it's like, I've done things that, you know, shouldn't be forgiven, or things like that, but Jesus shows his love for him.
It's interesting in Luke's version, some elders of the Jews go to Jesus on behalf of the centurion, and they really try to big up the centurion to Jesus. They say, it says, they pleaded earnestly with him, this man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he built our synagogue. And even these Jewish leaders are really trying to make it, sort of sell this centurion as worthy of Jesus' attention. Even they don't really understand that actually no one's really worthy. And it's when we realise our unworthiness that Jesus sort of comes and makes us worthy. It's Jesus that makes us worthy. And Jesus isn't that interested in what the guy has done, either good or bad. What he's interested in his faith and the fact that he loves him, and he heals his servant as a result of that the faith that the centurion has, in a way, rather than the centurion being worthy.
Because they're trying to say that because he's a centurion, because he's built the synagogues, that makes him worthy of being healed. Okay. So it's not by your works.
Exactly. So the Jewish elders are sort of the works of the centurion to make him worthy, and Jesus is, well, the whole Bible says, no, that's not, your works aren't what make you worthy. So in Matthew 8, verses 9 and 10, the centurion says to Jesus, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was astonished, and said to those following him, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith.
To be honest, as you were reading it, I read it the first time and it didn't really hit me, but reading it again, the centurion is asking Jesus to heal his servant. You know, and that shows like a certain level of love in his heart to heal his servant. You know, like he could just, being a man of stature, maybe, you know, he could allow it to be like, oh, his servant is sick, I'm gonna get a new servant. Right? But he's saying he's gone all this way to heal his servant. You know, I think that's important to note. So like, you can overlook that, to be honest.
And the question is, why does the centurion's statement astonish Jesus? And then why does Jesus link this statement to faith? And I think that's part of it. This centurion is pleading on behalf of his servant. And he's an important guy. He could just write off the servant, but there's something about leadership here and authority. This centurion is a good leader. He knows his authority, and he's good with it. You know, He's humble. He cares about the people that are under his authority.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of Jesus' astonishment. He recognises this guy's leadership, ability. Yeah. And he also recognises, the centurion likens Jesus' authority to his authority. Yeah. In the same way the centurion has authority over soldiers and servants, he recognises Jesus has authority over illnesses and diseases. Yeah. Later on, we get the calming of the storm in the same chapter where Jesus stops the winds and the waves, and his disciples say, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Well, the centurion had already realised that. Yeah. He knew that everything obeyed Jesus. Yeah. So, what else about the centurion statement do you think astonishes Jesus, and why does he link that statement about authority to faith?
It's a hard one. It's a hard one in terms of me being able to answer that at this time. Sometimes I need the time to just chew things, but
I think although this is early in Jesus' ministry, Jesus has been about. They're still in Galilee. They're still very close to where Jesus was born and brought up. But we know that Jesus was out and about. We've got the story of him as a young boy. His parents lose him and they find him in the Jerusalem temple. Yeah. So he's experienced the teaching of Judaism. He's experienced the teaching of the Pharisees probably, and the priests and the religious teachers. And he says, I've not seen faith like this in the whole of Israel. This centurion's realisation of the authority that Jesus has over everything is so important, and it's really important for us, I think, to realise that Jesus has authority over everything: illnesses, diseases, demons, the weather, absolutely everything.
I think listening, this reminds me of the woman who. Did she have she had a problem? She just had to touch his cloth.
Yeah, a woman who was bleeding.
The woman that was bleeding.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of that because he basically says I'm not worthy for you to be under my roof, but if you just speak one word to let my servant be healed, he believed that word, and I feel like you can relate that back to the woman who was bleeding, because all she knew, she just wanted to touch his cloth, and she believed that by just touching him, she'll be healed. Yeah. And it was by the faith in doing an action that she was healed. And I feel like it's the same with here. He knew all he needs to know. Jesus, you don't even have to be in my house. Yeah. You can just say the word, and I believe that my servant will be healed.
Yeah.
So I think that is what faith is, right? So when I pray, when I pray for things, if it's in God's will over my life, it shall come to pass. God knows my heart, knows my desires, and he listens to me, and what he has for my life is more than what I could even think for my life. I think the bare minimum. He thinks greater and in what's going to be stored up in heaven and all of those things, and sometimes you can miss that. But if I pray and I don't have the faith to allow it to, if I don't believe that it's going to happen, then that's the same as when Jesus walked on water and Simon walked. Simon walked on the water, but then his faith started to he started to panic a little bit, and then that's when he started to sink. So I think it's the same in terms of faith. If you have faith, and you believe what Jesus has said, you believe what God has said, then you don't have to worry.
I think so often, especially when it comes to healing, we put all sorts of rules and regulations in place. You've got to pray this prayer, you've got to say this thing, you've got to believe this. And actually in this story, like you said, the centurion says to Jesus, "Don't even come into my house. I'm not worthy. You just think my servant well, and he'll be well."
Yeah.
And Jesus says, "Go. It will be done just as you believed it would." He didn't even have to see the servant.
Yeah.
Didn't even have to ask the servant's name.
Yeah.
Just go. It will be done.
Yeah.
And they go. In Luke's version, they get back and they find that the servant has been healed.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing, isn't it? I wish we would see healings and things like that today. And sometimes we do. I've seen miraculous healings. I've been part of that, but they're few and far between. That faith, that acknowledgement of Jesus' authority over everything in our lives, I think is so important.
And I think it's also important for us as Christians to not put, we can sometimes allow the world or the circumstance to overwhelm our feelings. So let's say, for example, you ask in prayer in your secret place, you ask for healing of somebody who is sick. That healing might come in a way for that person, whether that person is healed there and then, or it might take a year, or whenever it is. But just to have that faith that in the name of Jesus, the prayer will be answered by the Father, right? So, but sometimes it's like, but I need this now, but sometimes it doesn't work like that. So I think that's when you're obviously you're judged on your heart, and if you have the faith and the patience, like, God, I know you're gonna do it. You're gonna do it. Whenever it happens, I know it's gonna happen. I think you have to have that kind of. That's how you have to be towards it. If it's like, oh God, I need this to happen now. Why didn't this happen now? I prayed for it. I believe in it, but it's not really faith. You're just kind of like you're a demand.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that for the sake of this, that it could be you could have that kind of stress from the world. I need to pay my rent now, and I've got no means, kind of thing.
Yeah.
God, I need money now. If not, I'm gonna have to go outside myself and get it myself. But I feel like when you've already made that decision to give God a timeline, if not, you're gonna do this, then that's not really faith.
Yeah.
That's just you demanding for something.
And I think that makes it difficult for the Holy Spirit to work in our lives.
Yeah.
Our hearts are hard that way.
Yeah.
So the centurion comes to Jesus with a humble request, a really humble request, and a demonstration of his faith. If we come to Jesus with an arrogant demand and a human timeline, it can be very difficult for the Spirit to work in us and through us.
No, that's good. I just wanted to.
Excellent. So, final question then, relating this to ourselves: how can we ensure that we allow Jesus to have authority over all areas of our lives? And I know, speaking personally, that's really difficult, isn't it? That there are parts of my life that I just think I want control of. My children, my relationship, like you're talking about money, possessions. There are things that we do, we kind of fence off a bit from Jesus and from our relationship. But how do we allow all of those things to come under the authority of Christ in our lives?
I think it comes down to full surrendering of everything. I'm saying that is easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes as Christians we believe that the work that Jesus is doing in us, it's not like it happens straight away. It's like over the course of your life, in Christ. It's kind of like it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's a journey. So I think you kind of just have to allow for the things in the journey, and not put too much pressure on yourself, but just allow for the fruits of the Spirit to kind of prevail. Because it's always, you could always put pressure on yourself. You have to now be like this, and you have to be like that. the Spirit is working, and as long as you're in your Word, and you're praying on, maybe you have the surrounding, you go to a good church, you have a good minister, or you have a friend group who are like also guided by the Word. I think that helps, and what you kind of allow yourself to receive. I think along that journey, that work will be finished in you.
Yeah.
I just think there's just so many factors in this world that you have to. That can.
There's a couple of hymns that come to mind that we mentioned in our Bible studies. Actually, one is "I Surrender All."
Yeah,
we sing that. I surrender all. It's so difficult.
It's
to surrender
difficult
all. To surrender everything. And the other one is an older hymn, "Trust and Obey." There's no better way than to trust and obey.
Yeah.
I honestly struggle to sing that. I think, struggle to trust and obey. Actually, I was a soldier and I was a chaplain in the army, and the soldiers the quicker a soldier understands the authority that he has to comply with the authority, the easier it is for them to be in the army. The soldiers that resist that authority, the soldiers that don't want to play the game, they struggle in the army. They really struggle. Whereas the ones that they get that there is a hierarchical structure and they have to exist in that, they find it easier and they live better. And I don't want to push that metaphor too far, but it's the same with Christianity. The quicker we realise that Christ is our authority figure, and to trust him and to obey him, the easier life as a Christian becomes. And life as a Christian isn't easy. I'm not saying it is, but when we trust and obey, it is easier to live that lifestyle, that Christian lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it is as simple as that. As you said, it's not as practical as that, But even me, I like to have control over, what I'm doing, I just like to have control over what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Or I have liked to, and probably the hardest thing for me has been to just, Lord, I don't know where it is I'm about to land. I don't know where it is that you are taking me, but I know that, what he has for me is for my good, And even in the moment where it's like, I just want to take the control back and just make the decision, I am learning, and I got baptized last year, and I've been born again for at least maybe the last couple of years. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard, but I'm learning the promises of God. I'm learning to know who Jesus is, not from what Ken has told me about God, not by what my family have told me about God. I'm learning myself who Jesus was and what he said and what he kind of preached and how he lived, to make my own mind up about, is this the person I want to follow? And it is for sure, from when a man who is being crucified and has been beaten and spat at and whipped, is saying to his last prayer to the Father to forgive those who do this to him, because they don't know what they're doing. That's somebody who shows that's love, right there, because easily, from what the world says, it's like eye for an eye. If you're nice to me, I'm nice to you. If you're not nice to me, then I have a right to then be not nice to you. What Jesus said, that's not what it is. Be nice to. If you're nice to me, be nice. If that person is not nice to you, be nice. And that is hard in itself. That is really hard in itself. But really, when I'm learning that, and you feel really free, you know what I'm saying. And sometimes I see people, and it's more like I'm gonna pray for you. I look at it in a different. I feel more sad than angry. And that's what I'm learning. I'm a chef, and I work in a kitchen, and I have to I have, like the Centurion, I have people under me, you know, and I have to communicate with people, and I've been on a whole journey, you know, and I'm still on the journey. I'm still learning to keep frustrations in check and all of those things, but it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable. And sometimes I have a joke and a laugh with God, like, you put me in this situation again. Why? But
brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation about the Centurion's sermon as we thought about faith and authority and just how challenging it can be to live under God's authority. And I hope you've appreciated our honesty, Andrew. You've been really open and honest and quite vulnerable, and I hope that you appreciate that. Please do feel free to get involved. As I said, leave a comment in the comment section, ask a question, make a point, or come along in person to the church. Next week, we're going to be looking at the healing of the Gerasenes demoniac in Luke's Gospel. So feel free to join us for that. Another really interesting healing passage in Jesus' ministry. So do hope you've enjoyed your time with us today. And I do hope and pray that you would have the faith of the Centurion and recognise Jesus' authority over all areas of your life.
And that's a wrap.
It's a wrap.